Straight up. So why don't we go ahead and call the meeting to order? If you'd all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Flags in the corner. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming. I do want to remind everybody this is a public meeting and we are being recorded video and audio. We do have a hybrid option as per state law. And so I want to ask if there's any additions to the agenda. Nope. And let's see. Any public, well, we'll do that in a minute. And at this point, do we want to call both meetings to the order? So I'll let you call your board to order.
Oh, I call the meeting of the Morrow County Commission to order.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and make introductions? I'm the Umatilla County Board Chair, John Schaefer. And I'll start.
I'm Cindy Timmons.
Dan Dorn.
Doug Olson, Umatilla County Council.
Valerie Ballard with Morrow County.
Greg Goebel, Morrow County Council.
Matt Jensen, County Administrator, Morrow County.
Roy Drago, Morrow County.
Dave Sykes, Morrow County.
Okay. So now we know who's who at the table. Do we have online? Do we have another commissioner online? I think.
Jeff, our other one is supposed to, Jeff Winholtz is our other commissioner. There, Jeff. Hey, your reverberator.
I think that was Tamara's. She's fixed it. Okay, we're good. So there we go. Okay, so at this point, I'll ask for any public input for a recognition of any visitors that is not part of the agenda that we already have. Is there anybody who'd like to address the board? Okay. Hearing and seeing none. Why don't we go ahead and get into item number 1 and with the Intergovernmental Agreement. Mr. Chair, I will turn it over to you for that.
Second, let me get the agenda up here. I'm sorry. Oops. Well, I think this is just Tamara, isn't it? You're on there, Tamara, right?
It is, actually, Council Goebel and Doug Olson might want to describe a summary of it.
That's what I thought.
Okay.
So I won't make it wait till I get the agenda. I'll get it, but go ahead, Tamara. Why don't you take it? You're in the council.
Valerie, do you have a hard printout of my laptop? Good.
You need to borrow mine or you?
I got the hard copy.
Okay.
Thanks.
You want a charger?
I don't think I have a plug-in over here, so.
Oh, it should have one. There's one right to the right over Matt's right shoulder. I think there's one on the wall.
Okay. I can go off the hard
Could
copy.
I do one more thing, please?
Sure.
I want to make sure we introduce Tamara Mabbitt, our planner, because she's engaged here, so I'll make sure everybody knows who she is.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, why don't we just go through the whole room, actually? We'll start with you, sir, right there.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ronan and Gloria with GSI Water Solutions. I'm a consultant with.
Yeah. Who you are?
It's me. Okay, I'm Bill Goss, a regional engineer with the Oregon Health Authority in Pendleton, and I work with public water systems.
I'm Todd Jarvis with the Institute for Water and Watersheds at Oregon State.
I'm Joe Pumar, I'm the Public Health Director for Umatilla County. Good morning, I'm Bob Walder, Community Development Director for Umatilla County.
Tony Sierra, Oregon Public Broadcasting.
Hi, everybody, I'm Chris Coates, I'm the North Central Region Manager for the Oregon Water Resources Department.
Kevin Inns, the Finance Director for Morrow County.
Barrett Thorson, East Oregonian.
Yes, I'm Marte, Regional Phone Journalist for East Oregon.
All right. So
I worry about your IT expert over here.
kind of look like a football player there.
Pretty good block.
Well, you should. Check these credentials.
Yeah, so the IGA stuff on the agenda, Mr. Olson drafted that, I reviewed it. It's essentially per the, I guess Tamara can.
I think that might be Commissioner Wendell's.
Wanting to be admitted.
It said, who?
He's admitted.
He's admitted?
Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
sorry about that.
Okay. So I guess Tamara can talk a little bit more about the EPA grant, but I guess one thing I want to note is that the hard copy we have today is a little bit different than the agenda that we posted online. So I talked with Tamara as well as our finance director, Kevin Ince, yesterday, and we need to go through some additional process prior to the award to Umatilla County. So it's per federal regulations, we have to make, a formal sub-award. So you'll notice on the second page, paragraph 2, subparagraph E, there's an additional sentence that just said, describing the payment from Morrow County to Umatilla County. Said payment shall be subject to Morrow County granting a formal sub-award to Umatilla County in compliance with all applicable CFRs within 30 days of the signing of this agreement. So I guess kind of our plan is at the next regularly scheduled Board of Commissioners meeting, we'll come up with this sub-award, the documents with all the required terminology as required under federal regulations, and we'll just sign it down. So I guess that's all I have to add. Do you have anything else, Doug?
No. Okay. That change is fine.
Okay, that's all you got on that?
Yeah.
Take it back to the agenda. I'm not always. There we go.
So I guess on the Umatilla County Board side, I would move for approval of the acceptance of this document.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Morrow County, move for adoption. Or second. Or do you want to make a motion?
No, that's
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay. It's moved and second to adopt. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, unanimous. Okay,
Yeah,
I did hear Commissioner Windholz
He
say
said
aye.
aye.
yeah, he did. So I guess we'll go. Number 2, we're down to number 2. We got that taken care of, right?
if you want, you can go ahead and sign these documents at this point.
And number 3, appoint the steering committee. So you want to address that, Jenny?
You bet. Thank
Okay.
you. So you have a list in front of you. So there is a list in your packet and posted online. So the steering committee will be working directly with the consultant,
He's got 2 copies. I think.
and the list of steering committee members is in your packet. It's an internal committee made up of staff, 2 from Umatilla County, 2 from Morrow County. Also, Dr. Todd Jarvis is here. He just introduced himself. And as well as Dr. Anna Cabanado, who's a chemistry professor at Eastern Oregon University, who has some specialty expertise in nitrates. So she won a national award for her study of nitrates in fish, et cetera. And then one person with boots on the ground experience is Carrie Maycomber. So also has a lot of lab and testing and field experience. It's a larger committee than I think we originally thought, but I really appreciate the field expertise and the academic and practical expertise as well.
Did everybody come willingly?
They did. They did.
Anybody's shoulder a little sore from a little twisting?
I didn't have to twist at all, which was really nice. And Todd even made the drive out last night from Corvallis, chasing the sunshine. So.
Yeah, but we have it here.
Do we need to adopt that, or is this part of your process here? The
We
steering committee, or?
would like both boards to formally appoint the steering committee.
Okay. Morrow County side, I'll entertain a motion to appoint the steering committee.
I move that we appoint the steering committee that was presented.
Oh, second. Okay, moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried unanimous.
I also want to create it as well at this point.
Okay.
I'll
Okay.
read the names. Or what'd you say?
Create.
Creation of
Create
the.
it.
Oh, great.
All right, I move to create and appoint the proposed steering committee.
Second.
Got a motion, a second. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, I got that done.
Real
Next
quick,
up,
before you move on, I just want to thank everybody for your willingness to serve on this committee. I know there's going to be a lot of work ahead in the future, so I really appreciate your willingness to serve and be a part of this committee. So thank you very much.
yeah, I echo the same thing. It's very important work. And we appreciate it, your commitment. Okay, next up, we'll go to number 3, presentation on draft scope of work. Ronald Gloria, GSI Water Solutions Incorporated, Joseph Kamara, Umatilla County Public Works Health Director, Tamara Maverick, Moore County Planning Director. So I'll turn it over to whoever's leading up this. Probably Tamara.
Yeah, I'll just say a few words before Ronan speaks, and we possibly should have done this part first, but here we are. So Ronan and Gloria, who's the project manager for GSI Water Solutions, came out today to present to the boards and to the public an overview of the scope of work. The next step when since we have the formal agreement and the steering committee appointment, will be to work with the steering committee to finalize the scope of work. Excuse me. And then in the coming weeks, Morrow County, who's the fiscal agent for the federal grant, will enter a contract with GSI Water Solutions. And I want to thank the people, Joe, and who was on the scoring committee. So we went through a robust process for selecting the consultant. We had 3 very good proposals. Unanimously, GSI Water Solutions was selected. Morrow County Board authorized the notice of intent to award several weeks ago. We had no protests, so we're moving forward with that final part of that procurement process. And so Joe, myself, Carrie Maycomber, and a retired engineer from Utah who came to us by way of recommendation of Todd Jarvis, who worked on a very similar project in Utah, was also on the scoring committee. So that was a well-rounded group. I think we all felt really positive about that.
His input was very helpful. His background, he spent a lot of years working on projects very similar to this.
Yeah, very good.
Well, thank you all for that.
Yeah, it was good. You're welcome. It was exciting. So I'd like to hand it over to Ronan and share my screen. He prepared a PowerPoint here. And then the agenda indicates that an opportunity for agency and public testimony. And I know a few folks from our sister agencies at the state level are here. And that's essential, really important, because right now they hold a lot of data that we're hoping to get. So Matt and I have been waiting for a final agreement for Matt to sign to get some data sharing agreement from Oregon Health Authority. So Ronan, you ready?
I am.
Okay.
Thanks, Tamara.
Yeah. Do you want me to prompt or you want to?
If you could.
I will. Yeah.
How much time?
Oh, how much time? Is
How
anybody?
much time do you need?
I can do it faster or more slowly. I'm assuming maybe a half an hour to kind of go over the scope framework. If folks are pressed for time, I could do it a lot faster, higher level, and just wait for questions as well. So, but I'll shoot for 20 to 30 minutes. If that's okay with folks.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking that.
So thank you for first of all selecting our team to work on this very important project. We're really excited to get it started. There's been a lot of lead up to this and decades of kind of the issues kind of being in the community. And so we're excited to get this going and hopefully have some solutions for the residents, the community out here. So what I want to do is just kind of go over the scope of work, kind of the framework that we proposed for the project, and solicit input as we go. But it's mostly want to kind of highlight the kind of the fast pace that I think we need to that we want to proceed with on the project. So when I go through this, you'll see that we have a pretty aggressive sort of proposed schedule, especially the first 6 months. This is a 2.5-year project with the EPA grant, and so we're kind of want to present kind of the arc of that effort, but with a focus on the first 6 months, really through the 2024 period. So with that, I guess I could just answer them here.
Yep.
So I want to just highlight, these are the topics that I'll cover. Kind of just introduce the project team, just for folks to get familiar with who's going to be involved, at least on the consultant side, and our relationship with the steering committee and the counties. Review the project goals, work through the approach, highlight the scope of work framework specifically around the next 6 to 8 months in 2024, and then just kind of highlight some schedule items. I'm going to shrink that a little bit.
I'll move it down a little bit. No,
Can you go to,
Maybe reduce.
full screen.
yeah, full screen?
Yeah, make that bigger.
How's that? Oh,
Can we just drag the corner?
I can reduce the size.
Go
a
down.
little bit.
Yeah.
There
Go
you go.
down on the bottom under view. all the way
Everything,
down.
everything you see is what they see.
There you go. All right, so this is the project team that's included in the proposal. It's a fairly
Real quick,
comprehensive
guys.
team.
Can we make that full screen?
I don't,
Go down all the
that's
way.
on,
It's not on there.
Is it you?
I think it, yeah.
Go all the way to the bottom where the,
One bottom here.
yeah, the bottom toolbar.
Oh, the bottom two.
I think he's talking about that.
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah.
And go under view.
Before we end, I want to give a shout out to the 2 senators who supported the funding. I should have done that earlier.
You could check it outside.
Oh, I'll do that.
Okay. Ronan has a slide, of course. He always has it.
Surprise.
Yeah.
Should I keep going up?
I can't make my screen any bigger.
While they're trying to go full screen on our end, I'll just kind of highlight the team here. So we have multiple team members. GSI Water Solutions is the prime on the team. We're going to do the overall effort more on sort of that program project manager side, and we're also going to be involved in the hydrogeology aspects and some of the field sampling efforts. We have HDR, who's a multinational engineering firm. They've got some experience out here as well. But they bring a lot of the engineering resources for the public water system connection options that we're going to be looking at. They also have a lead on the communications portion of the work, so we'll get into that a little bit. Corollo's on the team. They're primarily a water firm, and they specialize in water treatment, and so that's going to be their kind of primary role on the project, is to look at the nitrate treatment options that can be brought to the region. IRZ, local here, they're going to be primarily focused on the field efforts, so supporting on the ground local field efforts when we get to that point on the project. And then we have more of these, the next 3 here with Oregon State, Justin B. Green, and then Water and Security Solutions, who's Curtis Cood, sole proprietorship firm. They're more on the advisory sort of role on the project. With Oregon State, Dr. Salini Sarsidaran, and then Justin Green and Curtis have all been involved to some degree in the Lub Guama work. And so we really brought them in with the knowledge and background of the data, and then helping with some of the QAP development, the quality assurance project plan development, and really getting us to jumpstart that pretty quickly. We've been encouraged with some of the early communications that Tamara had with the agencies, we want to get the data transfer piece rolling pretty quickly. So there's been some of that already going on, but with Curtis and Justin and Dr. Salini, we hope we can move that pretty quickly in the process. And then the last team member here is folks from Consor. They have a pretty strong communications group as well, so they're going to be supporting HDR, Jonathan Hutchison with HDR on the communication side.
And the local.
And they have, interestingly, we just found out after we had brought this person in from Consor, Isaac Estrada, actually grew up in Irion. And his sister found out afterwards, actually he's an intern right now.
High school intern at our office. We didn't even know until later. And she said, that's my brother. Great.
Small world.
Yeah, we worked with Consor on a lot of communications projects, and Isaac happened to be from here, and that kind of worked out really well. There was also a couple of other team members who were from the area, region 2 community, so we're looking forward to them being engaged on the project.
Next.
Yeah. Okay. So before I get into our scope, I wanted to just kind of give, probably everyone here is aware of the process where the EPA got, or the county, Morrow County got the funding. But I wanted to kind of just remind folks more for context of the way we're approaching and some of the goals of the project. So this was congressionally directed spending funds. It was a process that the counties, I think Morrow County and
I'd actually like to recognize Commissioner Dan Doran, who pushed Bob Walder and I right along to get that submitted, didn't you?
No.
To
You
your
guys did all the
success.
work I watched.
I think you pushed. I think you helped a lot, so.
yeah, and this blurb here is actually from the letter Senator Merkley sent early in the process when we got involved supporting Tamara and Morrow County and submitting the EPA application to get this grant to the county.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to highlight a couple of items here because it really frames the approach and the work and the goals of the project. The portions in blue is kind of what I want to highlight there. It's really directed towards design and planning for extension of public water systems to provide drinking water to the domestic well users. The EPA grant is a research grant though, so it's not, we're not essentially authorized to do full design on the project. It's really more of a feasibility level work and finding those opportunities where that can move forward. I think Tamara was saying recently, you guys found out that the next sort of phase 2 of the federal funding looks like it's in a good place for the county to proceed. And I think that might be an opportunity for some of the design work to occur.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I could hold it to the end, but it seems like it's timely now. We have heard from lots of folks that they're tired of studies and testing, and that's understandable. But this, as Ronan said, is a research grant. However, there are other initiatives, local business group, H2OEO, and other entities who are willing to look at some low-hanging fruit and help fund some of those. We also have our state agency counterparts here. So people are teed up to do actual projects as well as support us in the research. So we don't have to wait till the end of this project to try to implement. Although for the majority of those well owners, it will take the end of this project and probably the end of the next project.
The other parts that I want to highlight here on the kind of just the overall sort of funding goals here is inventory of domestic wells and then testing. So that's the other parts of the funding is to do some more testing, and then sharing that information with private well owners. So that's the communication piece. So there's the feasibility sort of engineering piece, figuring out where can we connect public water systems to the domestic well users. There's an additional testing piece, characterization piece. And then there's the sort of community engagement and sharing of the information. So those are key parts that came out of that funding, and that's part of the goals that we're addressing with this project and the scope that we provided. And I'm kind of just converting that to sort of our interpretation of those project goals, thinking, this is focused on drinking water, right? Getting solutions for drinking water to the residents and community. But we know it's in the context of the larger nitrate llama issues and everything else that's going on in the two counties. So these goals sort of reflect that, the drinking water focus, but in the context of the kind of the broader issue that the two counties are facing now. So project goals, improving the understanding and extent of the nitrate contamination. Our focus on this project is really towards understanding that extent with the context of where and how can we connect to existing community water systems, and then what other options are there if we can't connect to a water system, characterizing that nitrate contamination in that context. The second is engaging and educating the domestic well users and community, and again that's in the context of how do we further, there's already been a lot of effort with communication, especially in the last couple of years, so we want to leverage that, but how can we under this project enhance that so that we can increase the awareness and participation, especially around that testing and sampling piece that we need to do under the project. And then the last piece in terms of goals is creating an action plan to implement these options that we identified under this project. Our goal here is to come up with, these are the community water systems that have these opportunities to serve these domestic well users. What needs to happen in order for that to occur, both from a design and funding and sort of permitting standpoint. identifying that in that action plan. And then, even though this is technically focused on public water system connections, we do want to take this opportunity to look at for those areas that can't connect from a feasibility standpoint to the public water system, what other options are there, whether that's treatment, putting additional wells. So that's part of the action plan we want to lay out at the end of the project. And then based on those goals, just some of the specific objectives that we want to lay out on the project is to start very quickly. Like Tamara said, folks are tired of studies. They want some action. They want to know that there's a plan, that here's what's going to happen. So we want to start this very quickly up front with a priority of characterizing areas where we can connect. And then what are those non-connection options? We want to get those on the table, have folks aware that these are the possible solutions that can be implemented in different parts of the study area.
Can we ask questions as you go along?
Sure.
Okay. Your second part right there, develop non-connection options early in the project. Can you expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, so some of the areas, if they're far away from existing water systems, it's not going to likely be feasible that it's going to be cost effective to connect to a system and extend a water line, for example. Or it could just be so spread out that trying to connect to a water system isn't going to be an option. So there's either local treatment, putting it in a deeper well that in an area that, deeper into the salt aquifer unit where maybe there's not nitrate contamination. So those are the kinds of options that we'll be looking at. So I'll get into this a little bit more in the details of the approach, but what we want to do is focus right up front of where the areas, understanding what the capacities and abilities of existing water systems are to extend and serve these areas. So that'll be an early priority. And then at the same time, sort of concurrently with that, for those areas that we know have high levels of nitrate, start thinking about what are the options that we can develop to serve or provide drinking water to those areas.
We're calling them the outliers. So they're a significant distance away from either an existing municipal system or where a municipal system would make sense.
Would that also include filter systems?
It could, yeah. Some areas, it might not, either a shared small treatment system or a deeper well may not be feasible in some areas. And it could be that some of these areas need to have these individual house treatment units.
Okay.
That's part of the full suite that we'll be looking at and start to kind of map out what are the areas and what kinds of drinking water options would apply for those different areas that are impacted. And then the second bullet here, leveraging data management and communications for broader regional benefit. Again, we're focused on this drinking water initiative and investigation, but we know that there's a lot of other data needs and communication needs from the Guama side. And so we want to try to leverage that and make sure that we're making best use of the funds that's available here for those kinds of regional benefits as well. And then the last piece here is just deliver this project collaboratively, more on kind of a program manager, and this is more from the consultant side, working with the steering committee, Tamara and Joe, the county side staff, and the steering committee. That we know folks are staff limited, time limited, so the extent that this team can deliver that collaboratively on more of that sort of program manager role. That's one of our objectives as well. All right, so now let's try to get a little bit into the overall approach. We kind of broke it out into 4 stages. Again, over the 2.5 year period. The first stage is going to be happening really right at this, hopefully in this next month, we'll be able to start right away doing a baseline assessment prioritization. So it's getting all the data, it's developing the detailed work plans, getting the CWAP in place, and then prioritizing areas for sampling, which is going to be happening in stage 2. So stage 2 is that initial sampling that's going to be occurring under this project. And then with a focus on where are those public water system connection options. The immediate sampling is going to be around the areas that we identified under stage 1. That's having high likelihood that we can get these public water systems to connect these areas and focusing any other specific sampling around those areas. And then developing sort of the feasibility and the conceptual designs and things, that's all happening under stage 2. And that's going to happen end of this year into early 2025. Stage 3 is follow-up sampling, and then feasibility of those alternate drinking water options. So the ones that aren't focused on the connection options, we'll focus on stage 3, and that's going to happen on the second half of 2025 into early 2026. And then the last stage here is development of the drinking water action plan. There's actually two parts of stage 4. Part of it overlaps with stage 2 and stage 3. The first part of kind of initial drinking water action plans focused on those public water system connections. So it's an action plan around those, and then sort of 4B, the second part of the drinking water action plan for stage 4 overlaps with the non-connection options.
Roland, before you go on, first of all, I want to thank you for, I think it's the strongest actually consulting team I've seen since I've been commissioner. It is a very strong, and I think the steering committee is, if they all did really come willingly, I think it's going to be great. My question is color of money. State has different requirements. The counties were pretty flexible, but federal money has a whole different set of rules, and especially when it comes to sampling and testing. Are we going to be looking at a whole different model basically than what we've seen in the past because of the requirements on the federal side?
Yeah, I'll say one of the first under stage 1, we're going to be developing a quality assurance project plan that's based off of what the objectives are for getting these drinking water options in place. It's going to be mostly in that context, but we are going to be working with all the agencies, DEQ, OHA, WRD, and looking at, defining what our data quality objectives are. That's going to really define, why are we collecting these samples? And once we know why we're collecting these samples and what it's going to be used for, that defines the methods and the requirements for that sampling. And I don't know if...
Do you have any feel for how far EPA is going to reach into this and be active or at least directive on type of samplings and types of tests?
So I have one of the next steps after today was a milestone is to, we work with the EPA. They don't need to finalize our action plan or our scope of work, but we want to make sure that the QAPP, which is really an academic process, that they approve of that. And Joe can speak for himself, but I concur with Joe's agenda has been as much as possible to utilize the existing data because people are tired of
I think that's what I was,
Yes, for sure. So that's why Ronan and his team are front loading that initial data coordination effort. And I don't remember if it's in your slide or not, but early on, we will have an interagency discussion about all this data and how we're sharing it and how we move forward just on that particular piece.
The one fear I do have, the whole thing, and we discussed this even in our application, is the fear of replicating and triplicating and losing the ability for solutions. I mean, if our outside people get to that frustration point, they're not going to listen to the solution. So I'm just curious about that. And it sounds like you guys have addressed that early. And I'm glad to hear the EPA is pretty much looking at not sticking their hand into it.
That's right.
I got a question. Now, is the goal to every well in Lawama, or is that, then you're gonna need testing to know? I mean, if one is whatever baseline you set, the state or the federal level, if they're close, then they're passed over for any kind of solution? Or, so, I mean, the people are tired of testing, but I mean, you gotta know, I mean, if you're gonna direct your infrastructure to a certain well, especially if it's an outlier well. If you go into a little small group, I guess you just do the whole group, irregardless of one test higher than the other one might be below standards, but so you are going to target the wells that are over a certain nitrate level, right?
Yeah, it's a combination of the previous question in terms of there's a lot of data that's available. It's not perfect data. They're not all consistent, but it does paint a picture, right? It helps us characterize a general sort of understanding of where the issues are. So we're not going to just put that aside and say, oh, we got to have all the data all consistent and a certain quality. That information is useful. They're not consistent, but it will help us in the stage one effort of prioritizing areas that we want to look at. One, it'll help, there's already areas that we know they're kind of like hotspots because of the data collected previously. So those are kind of areas we want to look at. This initial sort of round of sampling that we're going to be doing under stage two is one, to kind of refine our understanding of, we know that there's some hotspot areas. So that can help kind of delineate sort of the extent of those hot areas already, because that'll be feeding into the system extension options that we want to evaluate. But then there's also areas that, have no data at all. And so that's part of the stage three follow-up sampling and data gaps. So as part of actually stage two and stage three. So stage two is also going to include some data gap sampling for areas that we don't have any data for. And part of the communications plan that we're going to be setting up in that early part of the project is to leverage the work that's already been done by the counties on the communication side, but kind of push the message out a little bit more and see if we can get folks engaged and interested in getting their wells tested. And so we'll be in a position in the fall, hopefully, to get some data from those areas. And then that'll help sort of paint that broader picture of where we don't have samples. So, but we don't want to wait. We want to do a bunch of sampling and wait, to get our data set perfect before we start to do any engineering and analysis. So that's why we're going to kind of do things in parallel. The areas that we know are already impacted, let's start figuring out what solutions for those places are. And while we're doing that, do additional communications outreach, hopefully get some more folks to get tested, and then help characterize those areas where we have some holes.
And you're going to expand on that a little later on, how you're going to promote better engagement.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
we have a communications work plan that we're going to be developing here.
Okay.
Right up front. We actually, so I'm going to kind of highlight a little bit more at each of those stages, which we did a little bit with stage one here with some of those questions. So this first part of the project started basically in April, if we can get started by then, into sort of early fall, mid-fall timeframe. We're probably targeting that September, October timeframe is when we start to do some sampling, because we want to do a lot of that characterization and prioritization piece. So in time for getting sort of a dry season sampling, and then at the back end of this early part, we'll do some winter sampling as well to get a little bit of get some seasonal characterization. But basically, right off the gate, we're gonna get as much of the data that we have available. We'll start looking at water quality, the hydrogeology, and well data. Chris is here. Tamara's already had conversation with Chris and the Water Resources Department to get some assistance on that well characters, the well data. That was one of the holes in the previous sort of sampling efforts, is not knowing really where specifically the sample was collected from a well standpoint and the character of that well. How deep was it? Is it in the alluvial? Is it in the basalt? So some of that information will be characterized at that front here. And then two important sort of work planning efforts and work session efforts. Data management is going to be a key part. Working with the agencies, one, to get the data agreements in place. I think the county is mostly going to be leading that effort, but we'll be engaging with what we're calling agency data stewards. We're hoping we'll be able to form a group around the data with the key agencies. That's DEQ, OHA, ODA, WRD. Get a sort of representatives of those agencies to really understand the data, come up with a plan of how existing data, previously collected data, and the data that we're going to be collecting under this project can be integrated and shared. So that'll be part of that data management work plan. And then HDR and Consor will be developing a communications work plan. That's going to include both short-term, near-term activities that kind of launch the project and build awareness of the objectives and what that we want to try to get these additional samples, but it's also kind of longer term communications of keeping folks engaged, updating people as this project develops, some of the solutions that are being implemented, and then setting up for the stakeholder updates as we go along.
Can I just add to the communications work plan? The LUBGWAMA also has a communications subcommittee, and I put myself involved in that so that we can cross-pollinate those efforts. So the messaging that's going out about the LUBGWAMA, which most of us, I think, in the room understand, is that long-term effort to clean up the nitrates in the entire aquifer or aquifers, however it's characterized. So we're making really deliberate efforts so that we don't have independent communications recognized. So one of the early steps in the process is to convene folks from that subcommittee, from our steering committee, OHA, and the 2 counties who have ongoing water testing efforts as well.
So,
But we haven't all been together in the same room yet. So after today, that's one of the steps we'll work on.
so you mentioned Dr. Salini, and forgive me, I'm going to butcher her last name. So I'm just going to leave it at Dr. Salini for
Yeah,
now.
she's good with that.
Yeah. So how is this work going to tie into what she's doing?
So we brought her on the team for a couple of reasons. One is to take advantage of the data that she's already sort of pulled together, and the work that they're doing from the analysis on the hydrogeology analysis standpoint, characterizing the aquifer units and things like that. So that'll give us additional information that GSI's already been working on over the years. She's also got resources from the development of the quality assurance plan. So we're going to use her expertise in that area. So that's sort of to be developed a little bit in terms of the specifics, but it's mostly to bring her expertise and making sure that we're not duplicating efforts is a big part of that. So we're gonna, she's on vacation now, but when she returns, we're gonna firm that up.
Thank you.
It's a super good question. Lots of kind of moving pieces. Additional moving piece that Dr. Shalini Sadaziran is working on with a graduate student is this short-term sampling, and Bob Walder and I toured around with her a couple Fridays ago, and a graduate student. It's in addition to her work on the LUBGWAMA and this, but she's working with a graduate student to do some sampling to evaluate the chemistry, specifically to see connections with septic systems and nitrate. So they'll test for things like caffeine and sweeteners that wouldn't otherwise be in a water sample if it weren't for proximity to a septic system. So a lot of efforts to keep us all moving in the same direction, and as Ronan said, not duplicate efforts.
The part that we're trying to be conscious of as well on the project is, again, we're sort of focused on the drinking water solution side of things, and then there's a
meeting.
Yeah,
Oh, you got him out of there.
it was on the present, it
Oh,
came from the presentation.
Well,
I saw that
Basically
person just
joined in
joined
and then
just
took
a
over
few
the
minutes ago.
presentation.
Somebody
Oh.
took it over.
Yeah.
So I think the presentation's back there.
Did they share their screen or something?
Oh, they
They
came in
took
and
the
shared the
presentation,
screen.
yeah.
Oh, so do I need to if you click on the slide, will that work? Or do I need to reshare?
Come back up. I see Tim's on. I wonder if he can trace that.
Could have been worse.
Yeah,
Oh.
Much.
it's not the first time.
Is,
Unfortunately.
Yeah, right. Well, again, I want to apologize to everybody in the room because that was highly inappropriate. So please do know that did not come from either one of the two counties. So
But you may have to go back in and
But
re-present.
that also
Oh,
shows the vulnerabilities of online,
yes, it does.
online meetings.
Yes, it does.
sorry. Where's my share screen button?
It's over here.
Resume
Yeah.
your presentation.
Careful.
Yeah, I'd be ready to kill it.
So now if you go back to your page, you can go back to the full screen.
There he is. Let's not admit that guy.
Yeah, don't admit that one.
What am
Does he have a name on there?
Yeah, that's fine.
I?
I was gonna go get
Yeah, you need to go to your actual document. So go to the actual document you're sharing.
I think Tim's on it.
My actual document.
The actual, the thing you're sharing, or is it
Yeah,
at?
oh, here, right here.
Yep, go to it and then go to your full screen. Right there.
Is that better? Thank you. Okay. Oh, proceed. Yes. Okay. Next slide. Okay.
All right, so we're still on stage one here.
Then we need to go back one, because this is stage 2.
Right. Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
so we talked about the communications plan. The other key part of this early stage is looking at the existing public water system. So we're gonna, again, in parallel, look at every single water system that's in the study area to see, understand the water rights, the system capacities, constraints that they have to extend. And so that'll be an early exercise so we can see these areas don't have the ability to serve beyond what they're already doing. So that'll help with the prioritization piece. And then that leads into the drinking water options. Where are those areas that we can serve additional folks from these water systems? That'll feed into prioritizing where we're going to sample, and then also the developing a cloud. And then the next stage, again, this is where the sampling will occur. So this will happen in the fall 2024 and roll into early 2025. The communications work plan that we developed by this time, we'll actually be implementing that. We'll be doing outreach education. There'll be some early exercises in the communications piece as we set up to do the sampling. Again, getting the word out, trying to contact folks so we can get access. And then we'll start to do the actual sampling around those public water system connection target areas that we identify in stage 1. So these are the areas that we think we can extend these systems and whatever additional sampling to refine our understanding around the nitrate contamination. Those areas will be a focus in stage 2, as well as looking at those data gap areas that have no samples.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you have a sampling number that you're looking at as far as?
I would say not a firm number. What was one of the things that was asked in the proposal process was the sort of the allocation of funds, right? There's I think about 1.3 million available under the funding. We don't want to throw $1 million of that. It's just collecting new samples. You're not going to be able to do much in terms of the analysis. So we're estimating on order of like maybe a third of the budget. And then that's partly the other reason of doing this early stage characterization and prioritization is we get a better handle on what the extent of the problem is and the opportunities that solutions that we want to explore. So that way we'll be able to weigh like what's the priority of collecting more samples to characterize versus let's really flesh out the engineering solutions for these areas that we know we can get these extension opportunities. And that's where the steering committee is really going to play a big role, is helping weigh those priorities. Because there's going to be, one of the things I think will be useful to this exercise is we come up with these possible solutions early. It gives us a vision of like, these are the types of additional funding that we need in order to implement these things. And that will also help sort of lay out kind of, some of these implementation things can take years, right? So the earlier we can get going, the better. And that'll help us understand like, here's how much additional data we need to collect. And as the counties look for additional funding, that can be wrapped into that.
And I'd like to add to that, there to get funding, you have to actually know what it's going to cost for the project. So that's an important part of this. We really need to get the engineering done and what it's going to cost so we can ask for that money. So you can't just ask for a blank checkbook and expect to get anything. So.
And I was going to add, I mean, speaking for myself, one of the things that I really appreciated about the proposal from GSI was the fact that much more of the time and effort was going to be put on that analysis piece, much less on the sampling, while knowing that analysis is going to dictate how much of the sampling has to happen, right? I mean, we have to account for there's likely going to be some sampling that needs to be done. But we're planning at this point, which is ahead of the analysis, that it's not going to be the majority of the work.
Okay, that's
Thank
important. Okay, maybe part of the solution might be, or one of the solutions you said is to, look into a municipal water system. Is somebody on your team, like when you come and you say, okay, identify area, are they going to, engage that municipality to, okay, the
Yeah,
legal part of it?
Yeah.
Possible costs, okay.
yeah, that's one of the activities in that stage one is the assessing the existing public water systems. Is gonna involve sort of desktop exercises on our part, looking at water rights.
Yeah, I heard you
But there's-
mention that, but I just wanted
If
to
there's a
You're
piece, that-
gonna
yeah, we're gonna interview.
negotiate.
Yeah,
you know,
we're gonna
whatever,
interview
yeah.
the individual public water systems, because they'll have their perspective, right? And they'll know their systems. So that's the best way for us to get that information is here's constraints on their systems. And here's reasons why they think they wouldn't be able to, or,
Yeah.
would prefer not to, whatever. All that information we'll use to help identify, these are the opportunities that we have and these are the.
Try to get to a yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Well, I'll just add to that, in Morrow County, where we applied for that second round of CIP funds, we did get we only have two public water systems in the Guama area, and that's the two cities, Boardman and Oregon. And they did provide a letter of support, at least to support that effort. So it was a pretty strong indicator that they want to help be part of the solution. They can't commit any funds, but I thought that was a really good vote of support, that they want to be part of the, again, the solution countywide. And we haven't made that segue with and Umatilla County has more cities and more public water systems.
Well, and I mean, I've not broached that topic with our cities because I don't even know what it is I'm asking them to do yet. Right? I mean, and that's what I'm, on my side, that's what I'm hoping to get from this is, some information so that we can intelligently have that conversation and know what those barriers are, if this is a feasible option and all we're short are funds and some staffing, or are there a lot of other aspects that I have no idea about, that looking at a map, I'm like, why don't they just run down here? Easy, right? Not always.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
I realize all the
Quantity issues as well.
Capacity,
Capacity,
water rights,
water
all
rights.
those things.
I realize all the questions are derailing your timeline. I apologize for that, but I've got another one for you. I heard you mention something about digging deeper into a different aquifer. Is that going to affect the irrigators and the growers in the region at all? What impact will that have on our farmers?
That's one of the things we'll be looking at. There's there's already the critical groundwater areas. So there's already significant restrictions, in terms of putting in new wells, deeper wells. There's areas that will be restricted. That's something we'll be exploring with the department. These areas that's not even an option. So that, that's one of the things we'll be looking at. And that's where treatment becomes one of the things we have to then look at some of the areas. They're already pulling water, but it's, high levels of nitrate. What kind of treatment options are there going to be? So all those things we'll be looking at on early.
Well, then looking at your critical path and your scope of work, that, as you mentioned, you're a lot of data gathering. Especially in starting actually the end of this quarter and moving forward, it's pretty heavy loaded. One of the issues that we ran into as a Guama committee is agency sharing. And I mean, just to be blunt, and I don't want to, I don't want to speak for the full Guama committee, but Roy and I, Commissioner Drago and I were very involved with bringing on someone to help support that, to facilitate that, Jane Hill. And again, I don't want to speak for the whole of Guama committee, but I think that there would be a great effort into making sure that we share her with you guys, so that process, and even she's finding it's not as easy as it sounds. But I hope that there's a way for us to take advantage of that, because that's another program that's partially funded by the county. And knowing her, I think that she would be more than willing to help, especially on that agency data.
Thank you. I actually engaged her a few weeks ago, and so she's in the loop on us, the counties waiting for this data share agreement. We're just waiting for it to process at the state level, but it's, yeah, we will continue to lean on Jane. It's also helpful for her, I think, to get in the weeds on some of this detailed work.
Yeah, it's a good way to weave all of the work being done together.
Yeah, excellent. Good.
Yeah, and in some ways, it's fortunate that all that early legwork's been done over the last few months, because it sounds like at least the data agreement piece is much, much closer than it has been. There's a huge assumption on our part on the schedule that the data will be available and we can start looking at that. But I think that the counties already have some data, and so we're not gonna be like waiting again for the perfect data set to get going. I think there's enough data for us to kind of get a handle on the general extent and start to move forward on some of the other tasks that we have. Okay. I guess on the stage two, just to kind of wrap this part up. Okay. The sort of the end part of stage two is an understanding of where those public water system connection opportunities are and coming up with those concepts and costs, so that coming out of stage two, we'll be in a position to create that initial drinking water action plan. And the counties can start to look at what are those funding opportunities and things like that. So we want to try to start that as early as we can, while we're continuing the project. And then kind of
I just want to add a note here. This is really important, and it came out better in their proposal than maybe in the slide. This won't just be a top-down effort with steering committee and the consultants. So you have 3 really comprehensive work sessions, both internal with agencies, but external to landowners. So it's one thing for us to study, and we might come up with a solution, but if they don't like that solution, we need to either come up with another one or figure out a way that they can formally bow out of it. So I know OHA, I can't speak to it as well as Joe can. OHA and the counties have found people who don't want their well tested. And that's their property right? So that's why I wanted to stress, we have built in, GSI has a lot of stakeholder involvement. Do you want to say anything else about this?
I mean, I don't mean to open a can of worms, but in regards to Commissioner, one of your earlier questions, clusters of home, where some of this will get potentially contentious is if you have a cluster of say 10, 15 homes and 7 or 8 of them have high nitrates and 7 or 8 of them do not. Where do you go from there, right? And that's where some of the stakeholder engagement and the public involvement is really going to be helpful to inform some of those decisions, because it is entirely likely scenarios like that could come up.
Right. Unfortunately, that's one of those areas that maybe a little extra data would be helpful, because if you've got 7 or 8 that are good and 7 or 8 that aren't, then what is the difference between those two?
Correct.
Maybe that's your answer right there. So.
And that's a key part of that data gap piece is for those areas that we do have some data, maybe conflicting or sort of inconsistent data in some cases, that's where we're going to go back and say, well, let's double check this location and just see, is that an anomaly? Was it, if we check this other location, is that paint a better picture?
This is kind of a little quick side question. I think I've heard this before, and maybe you answered it once. If someone wants to sit there, not get tested, not have any solution, and drink nitrate water for the rest of their life, they can do that, correct? There's no mandate from DEP or EPA. Right. Nothing comes down on the county. That's all. Okay.
Joe wants to respond.
I can tell. So what I would say is yes, much like when we get complaints of, people living in squalor in their homes, they're allowed to do that with some exceptions around, small kids, elderly adult, I can't say there's a scenario where nobody comes in and intervenes. But strictly speaking, no.
Is that gonna fall on the county health department?
Those items don't,
Compliance?
those items don't.
Are there
But
compliance
we,
for us?
we get calls, usually it's, my neighbor lives in it and it's a mess and they live in this and that. And really my answer is they're allowed to.
Now, if you get into the cluster situation again, and you have, is it kind of like a public, other kind of system where a certain percentage of people vote, you can put it into all of them? Or without like a road or something? You don't need a 100% tie-in on a.
And I'll let Ronan chime in after, but I would say you don't necessarily, it usually comes down to the funding and the who's paying into that to make it fiscally feasible. And sometimes you might need all of them involved to make it something that maintenance down the line makes sense.
Like perhaps a water district.
Right,
Yep.
right.
Mhm.
And I have seen in other states, and I don't know what the legal piece was, but I've seen, and this was tied to septic systems where people didn't have to connect, but they were charged the monthly service rate anyway. And so and usually it's the fiscal tie that causes that, because there are costs to, even if there's money provided for putting these systems in, there are costs associated with maintaining them and keeping them up to date.
Yeah, and that's part of the sort of the economics analysis part that we would do on that feasibility question. And where the communications work plan piece plays a key role too, because we're not gonna, like Cam was sort of pointing out, we're not gonna do a bunch of analysis and planning and sort of engineering and then go out and start talking to people. We're gonna be continuously talking to folks, especially in those areas where there is this, either inconsistent data or it looks like, oh, if we provided a community water system here or water district, we could probably serve all these folks, but we want to get their buy-in, kind of just understanding of what the pluses and minuses of that are, and that education piece. So that's going to be a continual part of what we're doing, kind of in parallel with the engineering piece. So it's not like we're just walk in and say, oh, we're going to connect you guys on this system. So that's going to be part of the process.
Complex, at least.
Yeah.
Nuanced for sure. One of the steering committee members, Ana Pañaro, is the communication outreach staff person in the Morrow County Public Health Department. She's also bilingual and has had, on the Morrow County side, a lot of experience with that. And she will not let us forget that we need to include the folks who we're studying. So, and that's going to be a big effort to communicate with all of those well owners.
Time check. It's 10 o'clock. Do I need to speed it up, or questions are great. Those are really helpful.
Yeah, no, I think you're fine. Keep going.
Okay. The next stage is, again, sort of now the focus is coming out of stage 2. We've got a pretty ideas. We'll have a pretty good concept on the connection pieces. Stage 3 is more focused on filling in additional data collection, either to support, any questions or gaps that were identified from stage 2 on those connection options. But stage 3 is mostly focused on those non-connection options like new wells or treatment. And filling in the data gaps for those areas that weren't sampled before. That's what the focus of stage 3 is. And it's a little bit parallel process to what stage 2 is, but again, it's sort of more focused on the non-connection options. Just to kind of essentially the same process with steering committee and stakeholder work sessions, kind of the parallel, but sort of shifted in time. And the reason why we propose to do that is just from knowing that the funding around this was geared toward the connection options. We wanted to get that launched first. That's going to be a long process. If you're going to involve a new, extension of a water system or a new water district or something, that's a much longer process. We wanted to get that going first. And then the last stage is mostly just getting the plans and documentation and sort of formalizing the recommendations and findings from the previous stages. It's not actually sort of the last sequence piece. Coming out of stage 2, we'll have an action plan associated with the connection, and coming out of stage 3, we'll have an action plan associated with the non-connection options. I think Tamara, correct me if I'm wrong, I think sort of that phase two CDS or whatever approach that you guys went after. I think the initial concept was the kind of focus that on the engineering, like getting design done on the connection options. So if that timing wise rolls in, I think the idea is coming right out of
Phase two.
the stage two, and then the action plan, early action plan, you can just almost immediately jump into some engineering if that funding timing works out.
Hope so. We have to get to secure, make that application and secure those funds, but those complementing timelines should work that well as looking for other sources to actually construct, right? So capital funds. So I see Ryan DeGraft on the phone and Bill Goss is here. So some of our state agency partners, and there are other funds out there as well to look at actually building projects.
I want to repeat myself, but this is just a graphic that was in the proposal that shows the relative timelines of those different stages. So you'll see there's overlap between the different stages and not strictly sequential. But this kind of points out the two sort of rounds of sampling, sort of quote unquote dry and wet season sampling on stage two and dry and wet season sampling in stage three. And then you see those yellow and kind of orange circles associated with the major deliverables of the action plans, and then also the formal public stakeholder update processes.
Is there a way I can get a copy of this slide presentation at the end of this?
That's actually, one of us will share it for sure, and we'll also are going to stand up a place on the Morrow County webpage, and I haven't talked to Joe or Bob yet about that, so it's on both counties.
I was just gonna ask, Mona, will GSI have a page dedicated to this project?
Oh, we will, from the project delivery and management standpoint, we'll
Gotcha.
have like a share site for the steering committee and kind of the technical group to work together. But I think it probably, and this will flesh this out of the communications work plan, but I think it probably makes sense to have it, whatever public information you want to share coming directly from the county.
That, I agree. I just was looking to, how do we link that back to our Lackawanna page and our county page? And, I mean, there's a lot of places we can share that information.
To cross-reference it all, yeah. Not kind of like the old Dewey Decimal System. Just a little more advanced.
Well, for you, it's, me, it's still a Dewey Decimal.
I'm with you, yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of the high level different stages on the approach piece. And then the rest of the slides here are really focused on the stage one. I wanted to kind of focus on that a little bit. I'm not going to walk through every line on the schedule, but I wanted to highlight that we're proposing a pretty aggressive schedule with a lot of things going on. And a lot of it is going to depend on the work plans that, the data management work plan, the communications work plan. I think those can happen. But some of these tasks, like actually getting the data transfer here on task 2.2, that has a lot of external party coordination and assumptions that we need to make with the agencies and the data agreements falling into place and that kind of thing. The reason why it's compressed is because we do want to try to get out into the field and sampling at the latest in the fall, just to get the data in place, right, before it gets to winter. So that's really one of the main drivers, but it's also kind of just generally folks have been waiting for action and we want to try to push as hard as we can.
You have a little bit of flexibility though, in your schedule as far as working with those other stakeholders. Have you built that in just a little bit, or are you pretty compressed and hoping that everybody will work with you?
You're talking about with the agencies?
Exactly. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of crossing fingers and hoping,
Okay.
But like I said earlier, the counties already have some data. So we're going to proceed with that as much as we can, and start to kind of do some priorities. We may need to go back as data starts rolling in, but with the data that the counties have, I think we can go up and start to target some areas and keep moving. There might be more than, there might be a stage 2A, 2B, 2C kind of process as we go and how the timing and coordination with the external parties evolves. But there's a lot of things that we have control over, and we'll try those.
As you move through this, do you provide information to our political people, like our senators, or is anybody gonna give them a briefing to? Because they've been working pretty close to us, and we expect,
Yeah, yeah.
keep them up so they know what's going on.
Right, yeah, and I think if I remember right, Tamara, in the EPA application, we did budget for the counties to send representatives, I think, to DC.
We did.
And then have some communications on the county side with congressional representatives.
Yeah. That's a good question. Because they're interested in their making
are.
sure we have
They're interested.
funding. Yes.
We want to keep it that way.
Mhm.
I'm trying to see if there's things to highlight here. Yeah, I mean, we're trying to get the data work plan and the communications work plan done by end of May. So those can just, creating materials. When on the data management side, this data management project plan, one of the key outcomes of that is to have an agreement with the agencies of who's going to house the data. So that's a key part that we want to discuss up here in this early workshop later this month, hopefully. And then by the end of this process, the team will know and the agencies will know who's going to be sort of maintaining and holding that data. GSI could hold it, but it also could be the counties, could be the agencies, that kind of depending on what the status of the data is and who has sort of capacity. And I think thinking long-term, with the sort of that longer-term La Guama goal, even though again, this is like the drinking water focus, but we're thinking ahead and more broadly about the data.
Do you expect, like, I don't know which university in the state or around the region has the best water program, but do you expect them maybe?
Go ahead.
Oh, we got a guy here. We got a guy here that'll tell us. But, you can kind of see once you've done this deep dive and gotten stuff that nobody else has before, that the universities is, studying maybe something you haven't even thought of.
I mean, that's partly with Dr. Salini, and then Todd, now that he's in the steering committee. Maybe OSU is the best place to do that. I don't know. The other thing where we put in the proposal and want to explore, this was Curtis Coon's idea, was there's the state has this water data management portal initiative. And they're trying to set that up so that they can solve this issue of like all these agencies having their own data set. It's not shared. They can't communicate the data very well. And so they've got this initiative to create this portal, sort of centralized portal. And one thing we're going to explore in the discussion with this workshop is, does it make sense or can we time it right? So this can become like a pilot of that initiative. And maybe get some additional funding from the state, for example.
That's what I was thinking. Because it doesn't. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. And the agencies might speak up, but that conundrum about databases not speaking to each other is as frustrating for them as it is for us. So hopefully, like Ronan said, we can be the pilot project and use us to figure out a good solution for that.
Yeah. I mean, the agencies are already sort of engaged, right?
Yeah.
I think anything else here? I just maybe call out this communications training. One of the things that we want to do is integrate the communications with the field sampling. Again, this is sort of like how we're proposing to do sort of continual, communications with the residents and the domestic well owners.
And in coordination also with data sampling that the counties and OHA are involved in, right? So we need to have a common message. So it's understandable.
Yeah, so the people that are out in the field are going to be trained with like the messaging and the information that opportunity to communicate and share with folks that they're seeing, knocking on their doors and being able to have.
Will those be your folks, hired folks, CBOs? What are we considering there?
So it's a combination. What we put in a proposal was, we have internal staff to do that. We have the field staff that can help with the communications. But one of the things that we'll be doing in this communications workshop up front is talking with the steering committee about who their local resources are.
And that's right, you had what the name,
Consort.
Consort,
And-
and they'll coordinate that.
And also
Okay,
IRC.
That's all, no,
So,
okay,
yeah.
all right, that's just really coming
And-
up now.
At least one of the people at IRC who does the physical testing is bilingual.
And we're not, we want to keep the door open in terms of local organizations that are already out here doing some work. And that's the one thing we'll be talking with the steering committee about.
No.
I think that's kind of, I mean, this is
that's
just the detail. This is the later tasks with the reviewing the data and then developing the drinking water alternatives and then developing the CLAP. Let's see. Oh, I do want to highlight this workshop on the alternatives. That's going to be a pretty intense workshop where we'll be fleshing out the different options, connection, non-connection, and then treatment. That'll be a pretty technically oriented meeting, but it's kind of just a, get everything on the table of options that we'll be considering.
And hopefully have the cities and the public water system folks
Participate.
involved and other.
Or even the vendors, yeah.
Sure, for sure. Good idea.
Unless there's questions, I don't want to, go line by line.
I have one more, Ron, and then I'll have one more. And then I'll but just one more is, when you have your final document, is it addressed to the steering committee to present to the public, or is it to the EPA, or what audience is that document being?
Yeah.
To the steering committee, I hope is the answer.
Final.
Or is it the EPA?
I don't know. I think that's one thing that needs to get.
I'm presuming it's the two counties, but we probably need to flesh that out.
I mean, our assumption is that our product is to the steering committee. And
Okay, that's stop. Leave it right there.
Okay.
There's a requirement in the funding.
I think that's the case.
Okay.
If I could add on, I mean, first of all, I just want to say thanks to these staff and the consultants for all this hard work on it, but we really do perceive this as a great step to pull some information together that several different agencies could work on and get a concise action plan for these wells. The last thing we want to do is a shelf on or report on the shelf kind of approach. And while it will report to the steering committee, we'll likely come with action plans to both commissions and saying, okay, here's what we can do. Here's a couple funding sources we can chase. Because I know both the bodies want to take action and get some solutions on this. It's been a long time coming. So, and we appreciate the work that Bob, Joe, and Tamara have lifted in the last 6 months or so getting this together. They've really done a great job.
Oh, yes, this is my last slide. Key assumptions for this early stage that we talked about pretty much all this already. A lot of it is dependent on the agency coordination and getting the data in hand. But like I said, we're going to move forward with the data that we have available. And if we need to step back, we can do that. That's it.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tamara, did you say you wanted to thank a couple more people?
Yes, thank you very much. Should have said this earlier, but it's timely. So Senator Merkley was the lead senator, if you will, for both this congressional direct spending project as well as the one we just learned about at the end of last week. And so I really thank both Senator Merkley and Senator Wyden. And Jessica Keyes is Senator Merkley's field staff. I know you all know her, but she also has a background in public health and feels very committed to this. So she's been tremendously helpful. So just wanted to recognize them and say thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I know a few folks are here to provide some comments.
I got one more question. And when we get to the end of this, I know when in local municipalities, sometimes the engineers are familiar with funding sources.
Mhm.
Right at the state level, how it works, how that works. Because that's where, Is that something, I mean, will you just take this and leave that up to the county, or do you guys have background and history and where there might be funding sources?
We do, yeah.
Okay.
Remember back to the early slide with the project team, I would say, half of that team has involvement with securing funding for clients.
Okay.
So I think we have that pretty well covered.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I would also just note, Ryan DeGroff was on the phone, and Bill Goss from OHA, who deals with the drinking water systems. They continue to send us information. So I think they're standing at the ready to help us look for additional funding. There are also some private sector funds, folks who have come forward and said, we want to, like the business group H2O EO has said, we've got some money, we're generous, we want to be part of the solution. So we'll tap into that. We have to figure out the internal who and how we do that at the county level, both counties level.
Well, and we need to know the projects, right? I mean,
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, we have to
before,
have,
you can't ask for money without a.
Right,
project.
well, I mean,
Game.
you can ask, but it doesn't
Right.
go very
Get the
far.
money without the.
That's right. But Chair Sykes, that's very true. That was just on a meeting with the town of Lexington last night, and Brad Baird, their engineer, designs it and also helps them find funds. And there's some back and forth with that, with, for example, a one-stop meeting where all the state agencies convene and try to figure out how to fund a project. So that's a little bit farther down, but it's nice that some of it's built into the team that was
It
selected.
is.
Do I what? I'll unshare, yes. I'll unshare. Okay. So the next step. There we go. Yep. He's,
Okay, so he raised his hand.
oh, Nick, so are we at the agency and public testimony piece of the agenda or
Well,
more
it's-
questions?
Let's go ahead and hear from Nick, does he have a question? Is that what he's?
Oh, I
He's
just wanted to add really quick that I'm also the Morrow County grant writer. I'm on their roster, and I also have a lot of experience with water funding, and we'll be happy to help out when we get to that point.
Thank
That's
you
what
very
we
much.
pay him for. But he does an excellent job of it, so.
I got a little nervous. I didn't recognize the name. I saw the hand raised.
Yeah.
I'm a little gun shy, as you can imagine, so.
So does that kind of wrap it up? Agency and public testimony?
Not me.
Yeah, I think there are a few folks who came today to
Okay.
share.
Yeah,
We'll
let's
move on. Okay.
we have some folks in the audience that wanted to share with us. Imagine my surprise.
Right.
Oh, yours are already up. So.
All right.
We can come together.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have more seats.
Well, good morning, commissioners. Again, for the record, Chris Goetz, Oregon Water Resources Department. Very excited we've reached this milestone. Tamara and I have been talking about this issue for some time now. So happy that we're here today to celebrate actually getting this project moving. So a few things from my perspective, something that Tamara and I have talked about over the last 6 months or so, none of us are going to be successful without the other. And so I can't speak for my sister agencies, DEQ and ODA, but our coordination has certainly increased over the last year or so. And for our agency's part in this, we want to be an active participant in this project. There are things that our agencies, technical or communications teams, I think will really be able to complement what Ronan and his team have put together. We have, for example, a large technical group of people within the agency that have worked in this basin for decades now. And so we have a lot of experience in, well monitoring. We have, scientific tools, or we can, log the geophysical properties of a well, for example, and that tells us things about well construction, the aquifer that well is drilled into. So we want to be an active partner with the counties and GSI as we move forward. $1.2 million is a lot of money, admittedly, but when you think about the scope of the work that we have before us, it's really not that much money. And so we want to be able to kind of expand and extend that money and make it, get as most out of that money as we can. So if there are things that we can do to complement, or if there's holes in what, maybe Ronan and his team don't have the capacity in their budget, are there ways that we can help, fill those holes? A lot of our data, like our well log, like our groundwater database is online. So you can go online and look up your well. And, we've talked with Tamara and her team, as well as Umatilla County and OHA and others. It's not that the data is not there. It's depending on how old your well is, for example, really dictates how much information we have about it. So if you have a really old well, you drilled it, your house has been there for 50 years, you drilled a well when the house was built, the kind of regulations around information that you're required to provide the state back then were just different. And so we may have a well log, but when you look on the map to see where that well is actually physically on the ground, it may just all go to like the center of a quarter because, at that time you weren't required. We might have like a Route 3 box 10 as the address on the well log, which, today doesn't really help us very much. So there are things like that we've acknowledged as a gap in the data that we have, where we have a well log physically, we know on the landscape that well exists, but we have to tie those two things together. Ronan touched on this a little bit. We don't want to be, and I think Commissioner Doran did as well, we don't want to step on each other's toes or, look like to the external public like we're not well coordinated. So if, Ronan and his team are going out to a well, we don't want to show up at the well a week later, trying to get the same information to the extent that, we're going to participate with Ronan in developing the quality assurance plan. So when we're going to a site, we're all doing this. So no matter if it's the county or one of the contractors, we're collecting the same data in the same way, so that we don't have to continually go back to these wells. Oh, we need this other piece of information. We need this other piece of information. And, when the public health emergency was going on, and OHA and the counties and others were just trying to get a sense of the wells that were testing high, that was, the drive was like the public health emergency. There wasn't like, oh, we need to go out to these wells and collect all this data. It was like, we need to figure out like, what is the extent of the emergency? And so we don't want to have to keep coming back to the same landowners over and over and over again. So we're definitely very committed and interested in, no matter who's collecting the data, it's collected in the same way. And then those datas talk to each other. We don't have these data sets that are inconsistent. So I think the other thing that is happening, and I'm not exactly sure where in the stage it's at, but we've been having conversations with EPA on, they're interested in funding a project to develop a Lubguama data repository. So Ronan mentioned the data portal work that is going on at kind of the enterprise level at the state. This would be more specific for the Lubguama area and the different efforts that have been going with, kind of bring data in from other sources. It sounds like EPA is very interested in funding this. I think we just have to, and they're going to, they would build the infrastructure for it and et cetera. And so we just want to make sure that, I think for our interest in this, we don't want to have multiple databases where you're having to put data in multiple spots. So, we can utilize our groundwater database to hold some data. That's certainly great. We just want to make sure that we have a spot where we're not having to touch the same data a whole bunch of times. So I don't want to just talk and talk, as I've been known to do in some of these meetings, but I just want you all to know that we are, our agency in particular, and I think I can speak for DEQ certainly as well, that, we want to be engaged and helpful. And, this is something that we have, I think, some expertise that can help with this process. We want to make sure that we're an active partner and participant as this moves forward.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Any questions before I pass it to Bill? All right, thanks.
That's easy.
So, again, I'm Bill Goss with the Oregon Health Authority. I'm an engineer and I work in the Pendleton field office. I guess I just wanted to give a really, and then maybe you might be aware of some of this, but a quick rundown of what OHA's helped out with so far. Kind of spearheaded the sample collection at all the private wells in the Lub Guama with our partners in the community-based organizations. So we've sampled over 1,600 private wells so far, and we're continuing outreach to those homeowners that have not had their wells sampled yet. But we've run into some issues. Some, like I said, some people don't want anybody from the state or associated with government on their property. They don't want their well sampled. So there's going to be a few gaps in the sample collection. There's been over 50 reverse osmosis units installed in private homes so far. Those are done at homes where the nitrate levels are 25 milligrams per liter or less, because that's the effective range of those. And to those over 25 milligrams per liter, through our partner agency, Department of Human Services, they're delivering bottled water to, I think the last number I saw was like 424 homes are getting bottled water delivered. There's going to be another community meeting coming up April 18th in Boardman for more community outreach. And I don't really have an agenda for that, or I think there's going to be presentations, and the head of the Oregon Agriculture Department and the head of the DEQ are going to be there. That's my understanding. We've already talked quite a bit about the data sharing and mapping so that's being worked out. My specific role would be when it comes time to expand any of the municipal water systems or possibly develop a new public water system. I would be reviewing the plans for that just to make sure they meet all our construction standards. And so that's kind of what I do, is review plans. There are, and we've talked about some of the hurdles and the need for buy-in amongst the people who would be connected to a new public water system. And there's a couple more that, and I don't want to be a downer, but there's a few other hurdles out there that might crop up. One of which is the buy-in, because yes, you mentioned that, like a cluster of homes, and some may, some of their wells maybe meet the drinking water standard and some don't. Well, you also have the issue of connecting them up. All these people are going to have to start paying a water bill now of $50, $60 a month. So some people, that might just be a turnoff for some people too. And then for homes that might be, like, for example, inside urban growth boundary. Yeah, it's fairly easy to get, to allow the city to extend water service to homes inside the urban growth boundary, but a lot of cities have policies that if you connect to water, you also have to connect to sewer. So there's a potential that there might need to be some sewer projects. And then extension of municipal systems outside the urban growth boundary, I believe would be allowed in this situation under the land use laws because of the water contamination issue. There was another point I was going to make and I've lost it now. I've been making those bullet notes. So there's one other hurdle that will come up. It'll come up. So any questions for me? Yes.
Is there another area that's gone through this where you can see what's, you might mention these hurdles where you can steal some ideas, find out how they work through it?
Oh.
With, mainly with the things you were just talking about.
Not that I'm aware of in Oregon. There are a couple.
Breaking new ground here.
There are a couple other groundwater management areas, but in the state, there's actually a total of 3. There's one in the Willamette Valley and there's one in Malheur County, but it's not been raised to the level of declared an emergency like it was.
I guess general, and I'm thinking nationwide too. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, Dave, HDR, David, when they gave their presentation, there was I think it was Florida
Florida.
had several
Yep.
areas, Vermont. There was like actually probably a dozen East Coast areas that have looked at it. Texas is now looking at it. I think if I remember right, that Oklahoma just did a project, but it may have been tribal. I can't remember. But
There actually are.
Yeah, and I can't speak to all the details necessarily, but the Doug, and I'm blanking on his last name, but the gentleman out of Utah, who was on our scoring committee, who had worked on similar projects. Their overall project was different. They were working with a bunch of small water systems, and they were basically connecting a lot of interties and creating what was essentially a county-run water system, taking over all of the existing ones. Their issue was quantity of water, not so much the quality side. But my understanding of largely how that rolled out was essentially, legal requirements that this was going to happen. And he said they dealt with a number of years of unhappy folks in a variety of areas, but once they got past all of that, everybody is very happy with what the result is. And so, sometimes for some of these, and I could foresee some things happening here, is there could be some bumpy times where not everybody is in agreement. And at some point, decisions will likely have to be made in the absence of consensus, for lack of a better word, at some level. What that looks like, we don't know yet.
And you can do a phase in as well.
There's a lot of ways to implement that, but I'm just calling out, the points Bill brought up are valid.
Right.
Yeah.
So some of those hurdles can be taken, and instead of just throwing it in everybody's face, you can do a phase in process.
There's ways to try to do that and make that more palatable, and really it's hard. You can sit here and talk hypotheticals, but until we know some of what we're actually looking at, it's hard to kind of wrap your mind around what those options are.
Is there in there somewhere that I heard county run water system? I thought it was.
That was my understanding.
In Utah.
And that's why I asked if
When
there was
must be
another,
more.
that's where. So we're gonna have to see, we're gonna have to, Umatilla, get alone. No, it should.
Their scenario was different.
Okay.
There was a lot of the same challenges,
Yeah.
which is where his expertise was really beneficial to us.
And the reason why I asked that is this something we should start planning for fiscally? And I guess you don't know and what you don't know, right? And would that be something?
I think
Well, the easy options are going to be, are going to be expansions of existing systems. The
Yeah.
harder ones will be
No.
creations of new ones.
Right.
And there has to be some sort of entity to run them. They can be, much like an HOA, right? It can be a kind of a water district where it self does itself. And then Bill will probably speak to if that's a common thing. I don't think it's as common in Oregon as I've seen in some other states.
Well, we have one right here in the county up at Blake's Ranch.
Okay.
They have their own well, their own water system. If you're out there, you pay whether or not you won't use the water or not. You pay $300 a month a year.
Yeah, when you say right here in the county.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. We're over there.
But from a hypothetical standpoint, my assumption is a county could be the one to do that. Not that I'm promoting that.
No,
I'm just saying.
not that we want it, but we got to go to a solution. But then hearing what he was saying about some of the obstacles that might come up, I don't know it's kind of good to see if that was in there, if in their matrix there somewhere, buried in there somewhere.
It could be in the matrix.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the benefit for Ronan's part of this is that's really some of what happens after his project.
But part of our objective,
Laying
what we wanted to
foundations.
lay out, here are the issues for this particular sort of option that you were exploring. It's exactly what Bill's pointing out, and then what are the options to address those, or is it going to take long? What's the timeline implications
Yeah.
of that?
Because whether you have a county run system or you tap into the city and they charge us, somebody's got to pay, right? I mean, that's how it works.
And the other option is nothing changes, right? Which
Yeah.
is not
acceptable.
No,
Yeah.
that's not acceptable. That's one of the reasons we don't want to, we want to say that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
Loud and clear.
And what I like about the phase-in is if your neighbor jumps on and you decided to wait it out, but now your neighbor 8 months later says it's great, there's gonna be better buy-in options for the other people.
Sure.
So,
Where you sell the property and a new owner goes, hey, I want clean water.
So speaking of that, and you mentioned it, too, and I've heard it earlier, in a cluster of homes, one home may say, I don't want any testing, I don't want anything. Is there any kind of mechanism to protect the other entities, like, the county, public health, anybody's, for OHA for that matter, from getting sued down the road from them if all of a sudden that's the only home that in that cluster that got sick?
Yeah.
But everybody else who did the mitigation efforts didn't get sick, but the person that said, nope, don't test my waters, don't do anything.
Yeah.
Is there any protection?
I think if the outreach and attempts were documented to get that person or homeowner to get on board and get safe water, I think that would be, that's a legal question. So there's a couple attorneys in the room, so it might be better to answer that. But I think just documenting the outreach and attempts that were made would be a good safeguard.
And I do think, the current efforts through OHA on the public health side is to test every single home, right? Whereas the project through Ronan does not necessarily require every single home to be tested if they are within, say, a cluster, and it tells us enough about that area that we have a good understanding of what's going on. And that is a difference in the two pieces, because they're both looking at different end goals, right? The public health OHA current effort is simply about making sure folks are aware and have access to the safe drinking water as a Band-Aid to what we're working with right now. Whereas the goal on the project with Ronan and team is really more about laying in some more sustainable solutions or workarounds to a contaminated groundwater.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I got a quick question. Go back to Blake's, because they have a water district, and Tamara knows more about it than I do. Well, but you pay in whether or not you use the water. But do you know, Tamara, what happens if you don't pay? Do they put a lien on your property, or do you know? I
couldn't answer it.
I've never known whether there's properties up, if they could do that or not, because they are a water district. They hold meetings every year. They elect officers, and they decide when to raise the rates. And that's a functioning system.
Mhm.
But it's just to provide water for that. And how many's on? Do you know how many's up there? 100?
Maybe not quite that many,
Yeah.
but it's.
I want to say it's
fairly-
around 50 homes.
Okay,
I'm
that's why I
familiar
said
with it.
48 to 50.
I'm
Okay.
familiar with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
But probably that many lots that could hook up eventually.
Right.
And I did recall that my last point that I wanted to make was about getting, and this is always already brought up, but getting the city councils to buy in on these water extensions. There was a case, and I know Tamara will remember this, because it was in this room, there was quite a lively meeting about a small public water system located outside city of Hermiston, whose nitrate levels exceeded the standard. Our agency, OHA, said, you got to do something about it. It was a privately owned system with about 25 homes on it. PUC was involved. The developer failed to get a water right for using the water. And that was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. And we allowed the owner to basically discontinue serving water to those 25 homes. We gave them a year, and all those homeowners had to drill their own private wells to supply their homes. That was a really unfortunate outcome, which hopefully this whole process we're going through will avoid anything like that again.
Good lessons learned. There's a positive lesson and a positive example also. So the Power City water system, City of Umatilla several years ago said, we're not going to ignore you. We know you need a potable water. They could not drink the water in that system. And it was a locally owned system. So the city has been working hard. And I just checked within the last several months, and they're still working on extending water and sewer to that area, creating special zoning so they can have their critters and their lifestyle that they want. But that's a significant commitment on the part of the city and those landowners. And the first time the city hosted a meeting, they said, we don't want to talk with you. So some similar lessons learned there, but I think it had a positive outcome. But the one across the river, that wasn't an option to extend a municipal system out there. But those lessons learned, as long as Bill and I aren't retired quite yet, we'll bring some of the history to the table. Because we don't want to duplicate. I know outside of Pendleton, there's a lot of water districts that are primarily irrigation, and a lot of well-intentioned, very capable people form those districts. And then when they sell or pass it on to the next generation, there's nobody there to manage the system. So that is a significant consideration when we're looking at action plan implementation items.
Mr. Voss, I have a question. There's going to be gaps, you said, because people are going to say no. So do you have any idea, just from what you've done so far, what kind of pushback you're having? Is it very limited? Is it a little bit more than you'd like to see?
My understanding is that it's not pushback, but just lack of communication altogether. Like if somebody had a no trespassing sign at their driveway, the canvassers who were collecting the water samples just didn't go on the property at all. But there were mailings sent out to those homes, and if they didn't respond, well, what more can you do? You know, we don't have phone numbers for these people. We're not going to, start calling them to the point of harassing them. So I wouldn't say there's been pushback, but it just some people just want to be left alone.
Okay, so I guess maybe instead of using the word pushback, I'm engaged. So is that number fairly high, or I haven't?
I don't have those numbers. Yeah, I don't have those numbers with me.
About a third.
So if we're including those who had no trespassing signs, or those who had dogs in the yard that the canvassers didn't feel like they could progress into the yards safely or without causing an issue. It was about a third of at least in the Umatilla area, the Umatilla County, about a third of the homes they were trying to hit, where that was a result.
Okay.
During the door-to-door activities. I've had I would say, very small number of folks who have told us, no, don't come to me. I don't want to hear. And also a small number of folks who talking to my staff who said, no, I'm not going to fill out the voucher for OHA, but I'll let you at the county come in and do my test. So I can't really explain the why on that, but I think it is a small number of folks, but also testing with promises of no repercussions is one thing. And connecting to a public water system and capping off a well are different.
Very different. Yeah.
How often do you run? I'm sorry. How often do you run into? There's some issues in Morrow County about who looks at that data. Do they ask you that much, or want to know who's going to see this data, or because it is a reflection on the condition of the property?
Yeah. So we both us at the county and I know OHA, we have promised we will protect that data as much as we can. That said, it's not confidential information, right? It's not like it's not like we're having a communicable disease outbreak and I'm talking to folks. It doesn't have that same level of protection. But the thing I also try to remind folks is, and Bill might know the year, I think in the 80s was the law that was passed that with every transaction of real estate, the testing is required to be done, disclosed to the purchaser, and submitted to the state, I believe.
Right.
I know it doesn't always happen, But we've also fallen back on, this is a requirement we're not doing anything that has not already been as a requirement. It just may not in practice having been done in that way.
Yeah, and my understanding is the compliance with those real estate samples is low.
That is my
Low,
understanding.
like less than 20%. There's no repercussions. It doesn't prevent the sale of the property from going through, and there's no consequences if those tests aren't done. Sometimes the banks require it as part of the loan.
Okay. Anybody else want to visit with us? Or did you read through, Bill? I didn't.
I'm done. No, I think I brought up everything I wanted to.
Perfect.
Glad you remembered
Thank you.
your last time.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
No, you're on to listen with all your wisdom.
Steering committee.
I know.
Gather information.
He's out of Corvallis. He got out of town.
He's just happy to be here.
I'm happy to share a little bit on this regionalization situation. I appreciate you sharing the information that you have with respect to kind of the bigger picture. So before I joined OSU, I worked for a big engineering company for 20 years. And what we specialized in was regional water systems. I'm from Wyoming, so coming here kind of brought tears to my eyes yesterday with the wind blowing at 40 or 50 miles. But in Wyoming, they have their own water development program. It's funded through a severance tax. And given Wyoming, where the main streets are 100 miles long between towns, it's really not uncommon to have lots of little water systems scattered about. And the state was trying to accommodate all these small water systems through the years. And this program started in the 1970s. What they found was they pioneered a regional water system approach back in the late 80s and early 90s. And they started with a county. The first one was Natrona County, which is where Casper is located. It's by Oregon standards, it's a small town, but it's one of the bigger towns in Wyoming, 60,000 people. They had a water treatment plant and a well field, but they also had lots of little subdivisions scattered all over the place. And also had these really small towns located 40 miles away that were running out of water or had water quality problems. So what they decided to do was explore this notion of how do we pull these systems together. And so they started to do that. And then one of the things that they did as the program started to grow with respect to the regionalization concept was they finally decided, why are we stopping at the county lines? So they started to do regionalization based on basins. So the Bighorn Basin is a good example where they regionalized the water system from Grable, Wyoming down to Thermopolis, which is a pretty good distance. And they interconnected all the different systems together. What was interesting about that is they wrestled with the same issue that you're talking about. How do we have two counties with two different governing agencies deal with this? And this is a legal question I'm sure Ronald's group is going to be looking at different creative ways to these joint powers boards or governing boards to share these water systems and to connect them all together. It's not limited to Wyoming as a good example. I mean, we heard a little bit about some of the work that I did with Doug Evans in Summit County, Utah, where they also went through the process of a regional system, and the engineering company I worked for helped them with that process. And again, they had a lot of pushback, primarily from different sides of the county, where everybody didn't like the west side of the county because that's where Park City is located, and that's where all the millionaires are. But now the billionaires are moving to the east side of the county, and now they're running out of water. And actually, one of the small towns there, Oakley, Utah, made front page news in the New York Times because they said no more connections until we get a new source of water. So all of a sudden we started to see areas and people that were against this notion of regionalization coming together with other places are starting to run out of water. Now, this didn't happen overnight. It took years. They had a lawsuit that was filed by one water company against the county that lasted 11 years. That kind of sounds familiar with what's going on here, right? The lawsuit. This approach is pretty common, where there'll be people that are just mad and they're going to pull that litigation trigger. Another place that I worked, which has a lot of parallels with this, is in North Dakota. They had a water quality problem. And the Bureau of Reclamation recognized that they needed to come up with an approach to regionalize that water systems throughout the very large area in North Dakota. And so there are working models for doing this. You will just have, the trick is becoming creative and putting your differences aside. Now, one area that we're just getting started on is the coast, the Oregon coast. This went through a planning process that was sponsored by the Oregon Water Resources Department as one of their pilot planning studies. Well, this place-based planning study on the mid-coast has now recognized that the next big step is infrastructure. All right, so they have approached Oregon State to come up with, try to come up with different ideas on how to meet their water supply needs. So this is going in a lot of different directions, from desal, offshore groundwater, water importation, dams, subsurface storage of water, water by rail, bulk water transfers. These are the things that we're being asked to look at, and we're asked to come up with an optimization model that will help make some of the decisions. And the model already exists. Clean Water Services in Hillsborough has already adopted this model, and they're now working with us and our engineering staff and faculty to develop something comparable. Now, the real plus with this is the person who was the chief engineer and government relations engineer for Clean Water Services was a former faculty member at OSU, couldn't find a time to get retired, went to work for Clean Water Services, retired from Clean Water Services, and now he's the person who hired me 20 years ago, and he works for me now. So he's rejoined us, and we are now just getting this project underway where we're going to be looking at trying to figure out how to connect and to deal with 54 different small water systems to get them to all talk to each other to try to come up with a plan in Lincoln County. So yes, you're pioneering something, but you're not alone.
For a guy that didn't have much to say, you said quite a bit. That's interesting. Thank you.
Todd. That's good.
Yeah, good stuff.
We might get class credit for that too.
Yeah, there we go. That's exactly what I was thinking. That's good stuff. Okay, let's see. Anybody online want to say anything?
Is Jr. really going to be quiet?
JR?
All right. I'm not hearing anything. So summary of next steps, I think is the next. Yeah, let's we can take, I think we're just about done. I think we're just gonna wrap up.
Yeah, then we wrap it up.
Yeah.
I don't know how long that's gonna take.
That'll take 2 minutes.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
sorry.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
Yeah, I'll just
Not that I
highlight
want to
this.
rush.
No, fine. Actually, I think the next steps, I mentioned and Ronan covered a little bit. So we need to convene the steering committee, and if you're on the steering committee, if you can hang out for a few minutes afterwards, that would be great. I put on here that EPA will want to review our scope of work, but I heard last week they don't need to do that. My comfort level is to just have a nod from them so we don't compromise any funding. We'll finalize the scope of work and then develop a contract schedule. And then hopefully either the next or the following Board of Commissioners meeting, Morrill County will have a formal contract with GSI Water Solutions. And I also mentioned that's with Greg at the moment to take a look at the legal piece, and also with our finance director. GSI has built in where they will have a more finalized phase one of that contract work and then leave some flexibility, and then we'll go back and amend depending on the outcome of some of that phase one work that Ronan said. So I think that sounds wise, and it allows us to maximize the amount of funding for the betterment of the project. The steering committee meetings will be open to the public. So we'll be posting those as we do public meetings. So interested people, you're welcome to listen in. I think it'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to it. So as a professional, I will just say it's delightful to be working with both counties, and it's a challenging project, but worth the effort.
Perfect. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Sam.
thank you very much.
Mhm.
So, okay, with that, I think we will appreciate everybody being here. Remember, if you're on steering committee, I think Tamara's asked you to hang out for just a little bit. And again, I want to thank everybody for their willingness to participate. And thank you all for showing up. And with that, the Umatilla County Board is adjourned.
Hey, I want to likewise, I feel like we're on the path to doing some really good things. We're a tough problem that's been around. So I feel good about this. A lot of good energy going on here. So, you got anything you want to add to that?
Nope, I think we're
Okay. With that, we'll adjourn the Moore County Commission meeting.